Hey guys, I'm just going to talk through our thought experiment assignment here. I'm looking at the page on our thought experiments with the directions and the link to all the examples. So let's check it out. Okay, so I am first just asking you to select one thought experiment from the list below. And if you scroll down after the fairly longish directions, you'll see a list. And, click on a few of them. Check them out so that you pick one that seems most interesting to you. I think we always do our best work on stuff that interests us. So check out a few. Takes a little extra time at the beginning, but it's probably well worth it. So you can check on as many as you like. Okay, so select one, and then basically it's just a matter of following the 4 steps that are described below. And I'm asking you to basically divide your paper into these 4 steps and just have a little section heading. Step 1, where you can give it a name, but make sure you're separating off these 4 separate steps. Okay, so I'm talking like about 2 pages, double spaced here is what I'm thinking. Um, that's just a ballpark. So if you have a little more, that's fine. If you have a little less, I would go back and look at it and ask yourself how thorough your work is and whether you might be able to deepen your analysis a little bit. Check it out. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of summarize here the different steps. The first step might seem a little backwards, but actually this kind of backwards happens in a lot of research, philosophical papers, or really any paper where you're presenting an argument or a position of some sort. Often we put our conclusion at the beginning. And I definitely want you to do that here. I want to know right away what your ultimate conclusion is at the end of the thought experiment, even though, of course, that comes at the end, and this is the beginning. I want you to put the end at the beginning, essentially. Tell me right away what your ultimate conclusion is when it's all said and done. And essentially, the rest of it is you getting to that conclusion. So that lets me see what point you're, I don't want to say trying to prove, but support or justify in your thought experiment. So I know that right away. And as I go through, I can see the process through which you're justifying your position by doing the thought experiment. So make sure that is there right away. So secondly, I'm asking you to state briefly the hypothesis to be tested. Um, I think all of the thought experiments up there have a statement at the top of the page or a question. That's basically the issue at hand, the issue to be decided in the thought experiment. And it's like a regular experiment where there's some hypothesis, a scientific experiment is intended to either confirm or disconfirm. They're not running experiments, scientists, just for the hell of it. They've got a specific hypothesis that they want to test. And so too in thought experiments. There's some particular hypothesis or statement or question that is at issue, and going through the thought experiment should give us an answer or a perspective on that. So that's brief, and like I say, um, I've kind of put that up there for you. So just get that out there. You might also consider other issues that are in play. Include that. That's great. But also I'm asking you to consider what real life issues are connected to the hypothesis or the question. Think about, what kind of real life situations does this bear on? So then here, this is just a brief kind of setup paragraph showing the second thing. Just briefly kind of summarize the hypothetical scenario that basically constitutes the thought experiment. There's an imaginary situation, a hypothetical situation that the thought experiment presents to us. So just give me a brief little summary of that. And, I also ask you to consider why that particular description was chosen. And usually the description is chosen for very specific reasons namely that it isolates and brings to our attention very specific variables. And those are the variables that the thought experiment wants to study and understand better. And that's like a scientific experiment. They do the same thing. Scientific experiment is set up in the way that it is so as to isolate, control, and better understand some very specific variable. And often we can more closely isolate and understand that specific variable in a scientific lab than we can in real life, in nature, if you just went observing. So the thought experiment really works the same way, despite, and in some ways because of being so far-fetched, the intent is to isolate more clearly some very specific intuition, value, or issue in our understanding than we could really get in real life. So we want to know what topic or issue or variable is this thought experiment trying to isolate. Okay, I mean, that's pretty much getting a conclusion on that, whatever that turns out to be, that variable that's being isolated is kind of the point of the thought experiment. Okay, third is kind of where we get the boom, the bang, is what are the results? You know, scientific experiments have results. They may not always be conclusive, but something happened at the end of the experiment. A meter reads 10. Something turned red. We can see marks on a paper. Some result. So basically here, the result in your thought experiment is up to you. There's always going to be some kind of question for you to answer, decision for you to make, or statement to consider. And whatever your answer, judgment, or choice would be, that's the result. So really, you create the result here. So I ask you, what conclusion did you arrive at? Most importantly, what line of reasoning led you to your conclusion? That's really the heart of the thought experiment, where you're justifying your conclusion. And it's supposed to be interesting to you, the experimenter, to see your justification. This is the idea here is this is kind of pulling out of you your intuitions and your positions and your arguments and values in the process of justifying your conclusion, which often aren't that readily understood by ourselves. We might see more of our own intuitions in this process. But anyway, I want you to justify your conclusion. Um, and finally, I ask you to consider whether your conclusion would change if there were certain changes made to the scenario. What information, if added, would alter your conclusion? That's actually an important thing to consider, but include that. Maybe you can see why that would matter. I mean, if your judgment changes when we add facts of type A, then that means facts of type A are tied to your judgment in this area. If your conclusion wouldn't change when we include facts of type A, then that means facts of type A just are irrelevant to the decision-making process on this issue. So it shows us what values or kinds of facts our judgments and intuitions are tracking, depending on whether our judgment would change or not. Finally, we've got the overall conclusion, and this is kind of what we have at the beginning. On the basis of the thought experiment, what position do you take on the specific hypothesis at issue, but also anything else? What's the bigger picture here? What other positions do you see yourself taking, or would you have to take? Or what other values come into play? Kind of stepping back, what's the overall assessment that you see on the larger and smaller issues when it's all said and done? So explaining your overall conclusions, and it should be clear how your thought process got you there. Okay, so go ahead and look through the list. Some of them have some helpful videos, audios. I might be adding a little more. Take a look at the example of the thought experiment at the link. That one doesn't have the new directions in it. I'll get one like that up there soon. But check it out. It should still be helpful, and have fun.